So, I mean, I'll first say the reason that I turned to novel writing was actually very practical. Yes, my background's in theater and I love theater and my heart is there. But when I had a kid, I couldn't get to rehearsals anymore. And so I was like, okay, well, if it's just me and a
Yeah.
computer, maybe I can make it happen. So it was a very practical kind of turn.
Wow. Among your other things that you do, that you are a playwright, and I've read your plays and I love them. So, how do you see being a novelist and being a playwright in relationship to each other? What do you find common? What do you find how do those interact for you?
So the playwriting, I think, definitely informs so much of how I write. I think in terms of scenes, but the biggest difference is that in playwriting, you've got dialogue.
Right.
So you don't have access to the inner monologue of the character. And of course, this novel is like all inner monologue, which was great. Uh, that said, she doesn't get to speak very much, and she's so limited that I had to find ways that she could communicate to other characters and information could pass. And
Yeah.
so with that, I really relied on my physical theater background. So I used that in the novel writing in terms of figuring out ways that she could physically convey information, silently convey information. And so I leaned on that a lot, I would say.
And it's maybe worth mentioning to get people excited about the book that it is also a mystery. So
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
just a portrait of a sin eater, but there's some real adventure going on. And I think being like working within those constraints of how can the physical world communicate and how can she communicate through the physical world becomes really important and kind of brilliantly translated in that mystery. And actually, maybe we can talk about a little bit that's one of the pieces that I found most interesting, obviously. And I think the premise of the book itself is so rich, around this language of sin to food, like the translation of sin to food.
So yeah, so sin eating, historically, bread, sometimes they talk about ale or salt, but it really didn't have the range of foods. And so, I mean, some of it was practical and had to do with the mystery. I needed to have sins differentiated
Right.
so that the mystery made sense, because there's some sins that the reader needs to know what the sin is, because it's a crime. And so I had to differentiate them. And then also the idea of just this person sitting down to a sumptuous meal, I imagine this poor woman dressed in just dregs and being welcomed into these wealthy houses with just like massive amounts of food. And to me, that's such a provocative image that I loved that. Also, poverty and hunger are so linked. And then you have this woman who is at the absolute bottom, and she's one of the few women who has the luxury of flesh on the body at this time. So I loved those aspects, and I love kind of the visceral aspects of storytelling. As you can already see, I keep making these movements. But so I got to figure out what foods I wanted to match with what sins, and that was so much fun. I spent a lot of time with Tudor cookbooks, looking up different recipes, what people would have been eating at that time. Many of them I chose just from the onomatopoeia of like, wrath is gristle, because I love that word, or the word whipped syllabub. I love that so much that I made it a sin that would come up a lot in the book. So characters would have to say syllabub a whole lot.
A lot, right.
So yeah, it was a pleasure to get to do those aspects.